Hey everyone, glad you could join us today as we begin a new series entitled Now is the Time. We're going to walk through a book of the Bible that is a very unique book in the Bible because it's the only book of the Bible in which God's name is never mentioned. We live in a time in which over these last several months, it seems as though the world has been spinning out of control. We wonder, where is God? We're wondering if God is in control of all the things that are happening in the world around us. And we're going to look here in the book of Esther. And in this book, some of the very same things are happening. Things seem to be spiraling out of control. And we don't actually see the hand of God, but we do see the effects of God behind the scenes. And so we're going to look at some different people throughout this book of Esther and really determine that now is the time for you and I. It happened 2 years ago, actually. Our family moved here to Bellwood, Pennsylvania. And it was going to be my daughter's senior year in high school. And I warned her before school started. I said, listen, I grew up in a small town. I went to a small high school. And anytime there was a new girl that moved into our school, that all the boys would go crazy over her. And so I warned her. I said, now listen, when you start school, all the boys are going to go crazy over you because you're the new girl in town. And wouldn't you know, that's exactly what happened. I was talking to one of the football coaches, and he said that my daughter's name was mentioned oftentimes in that very first football practice. But there turned out to be one boy who had a very particular interest in my daughter. And several years ago, I had developed a dating application for my children. That if anybody wants to date my children, they have to fill out this application. And there's some, some general information, name, address, things like that. But then in that application, there's some very pointed questions as to how often do they read the Bible and how often do they go to church? And is there anybody in their life that's discipling them or mentoring them? And when I said to my daughter, I said, now, if you want to date this boy, there is an application that he has to fill out. And at first, my daughter thought I was joking. The boy thought I was joking until I actually produced the application. Now, you may think that that's overboard. There are probably some dads that in the comments below, you might want to say, hey, can I get a copy of that application? Because you and I know the truth that as a parent, that we're concerned about the people that our children hang out with. Right? If you have raised children or you currently raising children, you have been or are concerned about the people that your children hang out with. You're concerned about the friends that they make and what types of friends that they make. And I'm not just simply talking about children here, because a lot of times it seems as though we start to outgrow that principle. And we think that when we get older, when we go to college, when we become adults, that really it doesn't matter who we hang out with. But I want to talk to you today about how important it is for us to keep an eye on who we associate with and who we let into our inner circle, who we allow to become our friends. Now, what I'm talking about here today, there is no really right or wrong. I'm talking about something that's called wisdom. Ever since we, several months ago, preached through a book of the Bible, Ephesians, we came to Ephesians chapter 5, and there, Ephesians chapter 5, it says, walk as wise people. Ever since I have studied for that sermon several months ago, I've been constantly thinking about what is the wise thing for me to do, because wisdom kind of lives in the gray areas. When we talk about wisdom, there's no right or wrong. It's just simply the wise thing to do. And as we talk about this, sometimes as we talk about selecting our friends, there's a couple dangers that we have. Number one is that oftentimes when we hear a message like this, oftentimes we think of the other people in our life. We say, boy, I really wish my husband was here to hear this, or I really wish my kids would listen to this, or I'm going to take really good notes because I need to pass this along to a coworker who's really made some bad choices in their friendships. I don't want us to look at this through the lens of other people. I really want us to look at it at ourselves and really begin to examine our most important relationships, our friendships in our life. Another tendency that we have is to say that this message is judgmental. And in no way do I want to make this to be judgmental, but what I want you to do is to practice good judgment. You see, the difference here, judgmental, is that I'm making a judgment about another person. That's being judgmental. When I'm talking about having good judgment, what I'm doing is examining myself. And something very important for us to understand is that right now may not be the right time. And so as we think about wisdom and think about really who we associate with and who we are going to have in our lives and who are we going to make friends with. Because the good and the bad thing about friendships is exactly the same thing. When we have friendships and when they're really good friendships, it's a place in which we're accepted. Then the same is true about the bad side of friendships, is that many times we enter into friendships with the wrong people and we try so hard to be accepted by them that sometimes we begin to compromise in our life. And that's what we're going to look at here in the book of Esther as we start. We're going to see a king who was the most powerful man in the world of his time, but yet his friends determined his direction. And that's true in my life and your life as well, is that our friends determine the direction of our lives. The people that we surround ourselves with, the people that we listen to, the people that we go to for advice are people that are really going to determine the direction of our lives. And that's why, if you are a parent, you understand and you know this truth. That's why we are so paranoid about who our kids' friends are, because we understand that friends determine the direction of our lives. And so we're going to begin here in Esther chapter 1, and I'm not going to read all of it here right off the start, but I just want to, just as a little bit of a background, there's a king here whose name is Xerxes. And Xerxes has been having a huge party for 100+ days. And he's been invited all the people around him to come and enjoy this party. And he's been showing off all the things that he owns. He's been showing off all of his kingdom. And everybody's been having a great time. And everybody's been drinking a lot. In Esther chapter 1, verse 8, it says, "By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished." So they were having a good time. And as we look at this, I want you to see, first of all, the king's request. Because what's happening here is he's having this huge party. In verse 9, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. And then we come to verse 10 of chapter 1. "On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was high in spirits." Now, there's a lot of different terminology you can use there. Maybe he was buzzed, maybe he was tipsy, but in any case, he was high in spirits. He was having a good time. Now, allow me just to go on a side note here, just for a second. Because as we talk about the people that we surround ourselves with, I want you to remember that I'm not here to really say you should abstain from alcohol altogether, but I will say this. Think about all the stories that start, all the bad stories of people's lives who start with this sentence: "Me and my friends were drinking," right? "Me and my friends were drinking and I made some very terrible choices. Me and my friends were drinking and it didn't turn out so well." I've never heard anybody have a story that started with "me and my friends were drinking and then I made the best decision of my life." You never hear that. And that's what happens here. The king is high in spirits from wine. He commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him: Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass. And so I've really been working on those names this week. "To bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at." Now, it's interesting that the king requested this, and there was nobody in his life who said, "Yeah, you know what, maybe that's not a very good choice." Or, "Hey, big guy, let's pump the brakes here, because this may not turn out very well for you." But in any case, the king made this request that he wanted the queen brought before him. And what we see next is the queen's refusal. So he asks the servants to bring the queen to him. And then in verse number 12, it says, "But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger." Now, it doesn't tell us exactly why the queen refused, but I can only assume from what we read from the previous verses, the whole reason the king wanted her to come was so that he could show her off to all of his friends and treat her just like one of his other possessions that he had in his kingdom. It reminds me of, the guy who goes back to his high school reunion, and the whole reason he wants to go back is so that he can show off his wife to all of his former classmates. And that might be what's happening here. But in any case, the queen refuses to come. Maybe she said she's not going to be objectified. She doesn't want to be paraded in front of all the king's drunk friends. But in any case, look at how that verse ends. "Then the king became furious and burned with anger." Think about that for a second. Here is a king who is in control of the entire known world almost, but yet he can't even control his own emotions. And so the queen refuses, and the king burns with anger. He's really upset over what the queen has decided to do. And then I want you to see next is the advisor's recommendation. In verse 13, "Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king." Now, the word that is used here in Esther for closest in the original language can be close geographically, but oftentimes it's used to refer to being close relationally. And oftentimes it's translated an ally or a close friend, or even used to describe a relative. So these were individuals that were not just close to him geographically, they were close to him relationally. And so the king's demand is met with a denial, and now he's left with a dilemma. And the same is true in my life, in your life. When we're left with dilemmas, who do we turn to? We turn to those people who are closest to us, those people that we would consider allies or advisors in our life, those people who have special access to our lives. I remember when I worked at Wayne Christian School, and I had an office that was in the back of the administration building on campus. And in order for anybody to get to my office, they would have to walk past my administrative assistant. And many times she would not allow anybody past her unless they had an appointment. However, there was a group of people that could just come and go anytime they wanted. They could walk back to my office. They could come in and see me anytime they wanted. And that was my wife and my children. Because those were the people who are closest to me. They have special access to me. And that's what happens here with the king. He has these people who are closest to him. And then listen to what happens. And so they had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. In verse 15, "According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her." The Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, "Queen Vashti has done wrong not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes." So just a queen's refusal to come before the king turns out to be a national crisis. I think it's a little bit of an overreaction, as you can see. And so what Memucan then proposes to the king is that the queen just be banished. Because he said, if word gets out to all the people in the land, what's going to happen is the wives are not going to submit to their husbands. So we need to pass a law. The queen needs to be banished. Now, the irony in this is that they said, hey, we don't want all the people to hear about this. But when the law is passed, all the people heard about it. And then he said, let's banish Queen Vashti. The irony in that is that that's what she wanted to begin with. And so he makes this recommendation to the king. And then we come to verse 21 and we see the king's resolution. In verse 21, the king and his nobles were pleased with this advice. So the king did as Memucan proposed. That word pleased is a compound word in the original language. It means pleasing, but also means to the eye. And so as they heard this, they said, wow, this plan looks good. And what the king does is he puts that plan into action. The king did as he proposed. He sent dispatches to all the parts of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, and each people in its own language, proclaiming in each people's tongue that every man should be ruler over his own household. And so the very thing that they didn't want the people to find out about now is all over the place. And what's happened here is the king has had a problem. He comes to those who are closest to him, and there's a proposal that's made to the king, and the king said, yeah, that sounds good. And the king puts it into law. And then there's a gap between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. Most Bible scholars believe that probably 2 years has passed in between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. And at this time, Xerxes is going and he's fighting, and he's being repelled, and he loses the battle, he loses the war, he comes back home, and he's kind of dejected. And listen to what happens as chapter 2, verse 1 begins. Later, when the anger of King Xerxes had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. And what we see here is the king's regret. As you read that verse 1 of chapter 2, he remembered what Queen Vashti had done. He remembered what he had done to her. And as you read that, you can almost hear the regret in those words, almost as if the king is saying, what was I thinking? Why did I do that? And here's a truth that I think we see here that hopefully you will understand, that will help you in making wise choices in who you allow into your inner circles. And it's this, that some of our greatest regrets are the result of the people we have met. Think about that. Some of our greatest regrets are the result of the people that we met. I'm sure that right now you can think of that one person that now you're looking back and saying, boy, my life would have been completely different had I not met that person. You may be thinking about your husband and you're thinking, boy, I really wish he would have never met that person. Or you might be thinking about your wife and you're saying, boy, I really wish that person that's in her life right now that she would have never met them. Or maybe you're thinking about your children and you're thinking, boy, I really wish they hadn't met the friends that they met. Because some of our greatest regrets are the result of the people we have met. And that's exactly what we see here with King Xerxes. His regret is the result of the people that he allowed into life. Now listen, you know that we say here all the time that we are to really invest and invite in the lives of our friends, our relatives, our associates, our neighbors. We should be in the world making friends with people who are not believers, who are not followers of Jesus Christ, so that we can share with them the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. What I'm talking about here are those people who are your BFFs, your best friends forever. The people that you're allowing into your inner circle, the people that you run to for advice, the people that you call on the phone when you're having a difficult day, the people that are closest to you. Because some of our greatest regrets are the result of the people we have met. And so as we think about that great truth, as we reflect on how King Xerxes' life turned out because of the people that he allowed into his inner circle, I think there's some questions that you and I need to consider, some questions that I want you to begin to ask as you think about allowing people, as you use wisdom in allowing people into your life, some questions that you need to consider. Number one is, do my friends change my direction? In Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20, it says, walk with the wise and you will become wise. A companion of fools suffers harm. The writer of Proverbs tells us, you know how you become wise? You walk with wise people. Because friends determine the direction of our lives. When we walk with wise people, we're going to walk wisely. But he says the companion of fools suffers harm. When we allow people into our lives that allow us, that begin to lead us in the wrong direction. I hope that you have some convictions in your life. We're going to talk about that in a few weeks. But I hope you have some convictions in your life. I'm sure that you have some convictions as to what you want your marriage to look like. I'm sure you have some convictions as to how you want your children to turn out. I'm sure you have some convictions about your faith. And the moment that your friends start to pull you away from those convictions is when we start to get into trouble, because our friends determine our direction in life. And some of our greatest regrets are the result of the people we met. If you allow people to pull you away from your faith, if you allow friends to keep you from coming to church, if you allow the people in your life to really, you begin to see yourself compromising your values. Those are red lights. It's time to pump the brakes and maybe begin to back away from that relationship. So do my friends change my direction? Number 2 is, are you pressured to compromise? When you're around your friends, when you're around the people closest to you, do you feel the pressure to compromise? Let me put it this way. The things that before were never really a temptation, or maybe they were just simply a temptation, and now they've become a live option, that's when you need to begin to reevaluate your friendships. Because when they start to pressure you to compromise, when they start to pull you away from your convictions, when they start to change your direction, you begin to head down the wrong road. And what's going to happen is, if you continue that way, your greatest regrets are going to be the result of the people that you have met. So, do they begin to lead your life in the wrong direction? And as you're going in that wrong direction, do they tempt you? Do they pressure you to compromise the things that are most important to you? And then number 3 is, do you hide your whereabouts from the people that you care about? When we start to hide our whereabouts from the people that we care about, we may say, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. But when we start to have a tendency to want to hide our whereabouts from the people we care about, again, it's a yellow light that should let our conscience know that we need to have caution here. Because what happens when we start to hide our whereabouts is we really begin to dumb down our conscience. We begin to really dull our conscience, and we begin to say things, well, I'll go there with that person, but I'm just not going to participate. Well, I'll hang out in this place, but I'm just not going to do what they do. Let me ask you this. If that were an excuse that your 12-year-old daughter would use with you, would it fly with you? If your 12-year-old daughter would say, yeah, I'm going with my friends and we're going to a house and there's going to be drinking. But you know what, I'm not going to participate. We would say, no, we don't want you to go there, because we understand that our greatest regrets can be the result of the people we've met. And like I said, sometimes we believe that we outgrow this, and then we start to get into trouble. Because our friends determine our direction. So what do we do about it? I mean, if we begin to ask those questions and we see ourselves starting to compromise, if we see our lives starting to take a different direction because of the friends that we have made, what do we do about it? It's a very simple thing to do. Develop boundaries in your life. Right? Boundaries keep us from the danger zone. Many times we are always asking the wrong question. Oftentimes we ask, how close can I get without falling over? I have young people come to me and they said they're in a dating relationship, and they'll ask the question, how far can I go with my girlfriend, or how far can I go with my boyfriend? And I always say, hey, we're asking the wrong question. It shouldn't be how far can I go, but how far can I stay away? If you were to visit the Grand Canyon, you're not going to say, how close can I get to the edge without falling over? If you go to visit Niagara Falls, you're not going to say, how close can I get to the edge of the falls without falling over? No, you're going to say, how far can I stay back and still remain safe? And that's what a boundary does in our lives, is that the boundaries are always in the safe zone. The boundaries are never in the danger zone, but they're in the zone before we get to the danger zone so that we don't cross over into the danger zone. And so in your life, you may need to begin to develop some boundaries with your friends so that it keeps you from entering into the danger zone. And we've been hearing a lot in our culture today about social distancing. We want to social distance from the people around us. We want to stay at least 6 feet away because we don't want to get a virus that they're carrying, or we don't want to pass on a virus that maybe we're carrying. So we've been talking about how we should social distance so that we can remain safe. And the same is true relationally as it is physically. That there are some people in your life who may be friends in your life. They may be friends, they may be relatives, they may be associates, they may be neighbors. But you need to develop a boundary. You need to social distance yourself from them so that you remain safe from the influences that they can bring into your life. Now listen, I'm not telling you to be antisocial. What I'm telling you to do is to be selectively social. Really determine what are the boundaries that you're going to set up in your life to keep you from crossing into the danger zone, because our friends determine the direction of our life. And some of the greatest regrets that I have, and some of the greatest regrets that you have, are the result of the people that we have met. I'm like most parents. I've always been concerned about the people that my children hang out with. And we're always talking to our children as they were growing up about, hey, that's probably not the best person to hang out with because we see what they do and we don't want you to end up doing the things that they do. But last year, my daughter graduated from high school and she was going off to college, and I realized that she had grown up and I was no longer going to be there to look over her shoulder, to really guide her, to give her wisdom on the friends that she should select. And so as she went off to college, I just prayed. I prayed that God would keep her away from influences that would lead her the wrong way, that she would surround herself with good, godly friends that would lead her and guide her in the right direction. And when she got to campus, there were students that she began to be around, and they would invite her to parties where there was drinking and smoking and sex and all those bad things that happen in college. And I'm so glad that God protected the heart and the mind of my daughter, because she no longer wanted to go to those parties, and so she stopped going. They stopped inviting her. Eventually, she was even ostracized from the social media that her friends had set up. And now that she's on the other side of that, she's so thankful that she did not continue down that path with those friends, because she realizes that her greatest regrets could be the result of the people that she met. Because our friends determine the direction of our lives. So develop some boundaries. Those people that you're going to allow closest in your life, are they going in the right direction? Walk with the wise and you'll become wise. A companion of fools suffers harm. Father, we thank you for your word today. We thank you for ways in which it impacts our lives. I pray that we would not believe ourselves to have outgrown this principle, but that we would really examine our friends, Understanding that our friends determine the direction of our lives, and some of our greatest regrets are the result of the people that we've met. And God, give us wisdom in developing boundaries. And may we select friends that are going in the same direction. We select friends that really are going to direct our lives in the right way. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you for joining us for this first message in a very important series, and I can't wait to see you soon.